Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Punch Kick Choke Chat. My name is Sean Benson. I'm one of your hosts, and we have the pleasure of being here tonight with Hanshi Michael Calandra. And I had a question teed up, and we're going to get to my question. And if you've looked at his site, you'll know what my question's going to be. However, we were discussing beforehand, and he brought up something much more interesting. So we're going to start there. Hanshi, what are the issues with Okinawan karate? Let's get right at it.
So I've been going to Okinawa since 1991. So I've seen some different things going on, right? But basically, the big problem with Okinawan karate is there hasn't been a senior teacher in Okinawa been involved in a real fighting situation in probably about 70 years. And what we're seeing now going on in Okinawan karate, initially it was the push to sport. Now it's the push to tourism. And, one of the problems I see is, and I have no problem with either one of those. I mean, I'm all for both if that's what you like. But one of the big problems I'm seeing is we're getting away from karate's original intent, which was as an art of self-defense. And I see the way a lot of people train in karate. I look at the Motobu drills that he was teaching back then, which if you know them or if you've worked them, make a lot of sense. And then I see a lot of the drills that they're doing in modern karate. And from a real fight standpoint, not a sport fighting standpoint, they just don't work. And that's one of the things that concerns me that, and that's one of the things, like I've had discussions with senior teachers in Okinawa who have asked me why they're losing students come middle school. They go, we lose students come middle school. And I said, well, you lose students come middle school because you made karate a sport. And they start playing real sports in middle school, like soccer and basketball and baseball. And those are a lot more fun as sports than karate. And, karate, you go to karate tournament. Okay. You do a kata. How long does that take? A minute and a half. And then if you lose, you're out. And then if you're fighting and you get knocked out in the first round and you lose in the first round, well, you spent a whole, part of your day competing for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Whereas in these other sports, they're a lot more exciting. The kids run up and down the field. So I said to them, I said, karate should be about self-defense and a life protection art. And the sport and the tourism stuff, that can be part of it too. But I think that's the big problem I'm seeing with modern Okinawan karate. And I think they're going to continue to bleed students. I think, it's not nearly as popular. I know when I went in 91, I did a lot of walking around by myself. There were a lot of dojo. Since I've gone back on other trips, I've seen less and less dojo every time I go. And, to me, this is a problem. And they're all having problems with it. It's just not as popular there. And again, I think when you make it a serious study, I think then, especially like guys our age, I mean, I don't know if you guys still compete or anything, but, usually a person gets to a certain age and, they don't want to compete anymore. And if the dojo is only pushing, tournament competition, well then, again, you're gonna lose people, So, so that's just something I wanted to bring up and mention that, I just think I see as a problem. And I think if, and it's great that Okinawa is a very safe place, but I firmly believe that people that are training in the West take the self-defense aspect much more serious than the current crop of Okinawan masters do. So
What an awesome opening to our show. And we're going to go around the horn, but not yet, because I want to ask you one more follow-up on this, which is,
sure.
If somebody is living in a safe place and they have the roots and they were brought up with this, what would you suggest? I mean, if you're talking to Okinawan Master X, what would you say they have to do to actually, because if they're not in these street conflict type things, how do they then harden their steel?
Well, you have YouTube where you can see a million real fights, right? You can see how criminals throw a punch. You can work on that. Every attack I see in an Okinawan dojo is a karate style punch. I mentioned to Joe Swift when I interviewed him, I said, Joe, when's the last time you saw a karate sensei in Okinawa work on ground fighting? And he said, never. I said, when's the last time you saw a karate sensei in Okinawa work on knife defense? He said, never. And now, now in Isshin-Ryu, Tatsuo Shimabuku had knife defense and he had ground fighting. Now, again, we're not talking ground fighting like Gracie Jiu-Jitsu ground fighting. We're talking simple ground fighting techniques, right? But he practiced them and he taught them. He taught them to the Marines that were there. So we know that at one point, the Okinawan masters were teaching this stuff. But again, I think they've kind of lost their way a little bit. And, I just like to see it come back to where they're also talking about it as a self-protection art, not just this sport aspect. And again, like I said, I'm for whatever makes you happy. So if karate as a sport makes you happy, I'm good with that, you know. And again, now it's become a lot of tourism. I mean, a lot. And I'm sure as Pat McCarthy told me before I came, he says, "Well, you're going to be in for a big surprise when you get here." I said, "Okay." So we're going to see, right?
I appreciate that. Sensei Suino, let's go to you next, and not just because you're so well dressed, but you do look good. Any aspects of what our Hanshi just said, you might not relate as specifically to Okinawan karate per se, but that conversation in general, what does that bring up in you?
Well, I was at the Kodokan last October or November, I can't remember which, about a year ago. And we met the president of the Kodokan. We trained a bunch, and we talked to a couple of guys on the ground there, some friends of mine who have lived in Tokyo for years. And they said, "Hey, the Kodokan, they'll never let you know this, but they're in crisis. Their membership is down by 2/3 compared to a decade ago, 15 years ago." And I asked kind of the same, related questions, like what's going on there? And part of it is the what do you want to call it, stodgy mentality of the folks that are running it, right? They're kind of trapped in their historical ways of thinking. Part of it is this is funny to say, but the excessive emphasis on sport and not the other aspects of which you think would popularize it, but in fact, in the long term, it doesn't.
Right.
And so I think I see a lot of echoes of the same thing. I think a lot of folks that have been in the martial arts a long time are resting on their laurels, and they're not thinking about how to present it so that people can as I say about our dojo JMac, I think the front door should be wide open. That doesn't mean that the door to the inner chamber should be wide open, but I think the front door should be wide open. And I don't think folks are making that happen.
Thanks so much. Let's go to you, Sensei Dauphin. Any part of this? And one thing I want to add, Sensei Dauphin, like we know from grappling classes that you're hands-on for an hour. So any extra thoughts about what he said about a tournament lasting, a minute 20 for your kata versus a soccer game, which is 90 minutes?
Well, I agree with almost everything verbatim of what he said. I just want to build on it.
Yep.
I was a competitor for a long time, but that's not why I joined. I never joined karate because I was like, oh, I want to be a world champion in kata, or I want to be a world champion in karate fighting. I joined because I wanted to be a better fighter and I wanted to be able to defend myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I luckily found, and I went to other places in my youth and just thought, these people aren't so good. That didn't happen when I walked into a Legacy Shorin-Ryu dojo. When I walked into a Legacy Shorin-Ryu dojo, I realized really quickly I couldn't defend myself against any of these people. And it wasn't because they were doing katas. It was, the katas are beautiful, and that's the roadmap. I'm not trashing kata in any way. I love it. But it's because when I watch Sensei Legacy and the black belts fight and do their bunkai and their applications, I was like, shit, I couldn't do anything against these people if I wanted to. They would all destroy me. Every single, the 14-year-olds would, so would the women, and so would all the men. Like they would all beat me up. And I was like an 18-year-old muscular jock coming in there thinking I could do something. So, and I have this saying, Sean, when I teach, like, especially self-defense, because even in the kata side, a trend I don't like seeing is where people start trying to make every movement in the kata become a sport bunkai type of an application, which is just totally bizarre and unrealistic, right? And so when I'm teaching, I often say, don't expect the bad guy to participate in your fantasy. Right? I say that all the time. Don't expect the bad guy to participate in your fantasy. And yeah, as far as Okinawa goes, I went there once with Sensei Legacy, and there's a certain master, I'm not going to mention their name, but they actually, like, when we asked questions about Hakutsuru, he said it didn't exist. And he had a Hakutsuru master. Sensei Legacy's been doing that for like sitting in the dojo. And when he asked about it, he lied and said it doesn't exist. And then he said, I would see one person do a kata. And, you know, Sensei Legacy just nodded at me and I went out on the floor and then I looked at him again and he went, which was, you're going to do a kata. And the nodding was, you're going to do a white crane kata. And you could see this master's face like instantly change. Why in the hell did I tell them that there was no white crane? Why did I do that?
So can I mention a couple of things?
Sure.
Please.
So as far as Nick said, I know for a fact that New Year's Day, the Kodokan used to have all the jiu-jitsu dojo, the Koru Jiu-Jitsu dojo come to the Kodokan and do a demonstration. When they first started doing that, they had over 200 Ryu that were coming to demonstrate. Last I heard, it was down to, I believe, less than 25. Okay, so the Koru has the same exact problem. They're losing people. Arts are disappearing like crazy. You know, I attended an event a few years ago. I was promised the Okinawan master that was coming would be doing more. I don't like to use the word advanced, but let's say not just the basics and the basic kata. Of course, once I get there, he doesn't. And I wound up assisting him teaching the whole weekend and never went over anything, you know, that I would have liked to gone over. I also, while I was there, attended a seminar with a 10th Dan from Okinawa, and someone asked him to demonstrate an application for the last technique in the Hanshi. And there was probably over 100 people in the room. And when he demonstrated this so-called fighting application, you could hear a pin drop. And people are literally looking at each other like, does he think that actually would ever work? And he started to walk off, and then he realized, and he came back and he showed a second one, which was only slightly better than the first one. And, you know, my thing is you ask the question, well, how could they fix it? Well, they've got to start working against some real attacks and figuring things out. And and there are a lot of answers in the kata. And I agree with you too, that, you know, I do a lot of bunkai, and like I tell people, like, I don't like all the bunkai I teach, but here's the problem. I don't know what's going to work for the person in the room. I don't know what they're going to like. I may do a bunkai that I don't like. I really don't like it, but I show it. And there's two people in the room that think, oh, that works really good. I can do that really well. Okay, good. That's good for them. So one of the things I think of as an instructor is my job is to show a lot of different stuff. But you have to filter it out. As you go through your journey in martial arts, you have to filter it out and figure out what is going to work for you, your body type, your size, your age, whatever it is, you know. So, but yeah, it's sad about the Kodokan. It's just, it's a problem. And, you know, they got to try to get their heads wrapped around it and figure it out. So.
I love that perspective on teaching stuff you might not love, but offering it so they might pick it up. We talk about that a lot. Sensei Dofen, before we go to Hanshi Legacy, I want to know if you have one more thought on this.
I do, because I was once in Japan with Sensei Suino as well. Well, I've been to Japan a couple times with all of my senseis, but I think it was the first time I went with you, Sensei Suino, where we went to a karate dojo, and it was a Goju dojo, and I do Shorin-ryu, and Suino Sensei does Goju. And so, you know, I can do Giksa Ichidai and like, so I just kind of jumped in there and started doing it with them. But then we went to dinner. One of the young black belts started to trash me a little bit and didn't realize that Suino Sensei could speak Japanese. Right. So Suino started to laugh, and I said, "What's going on?" And he's like, "That young guy over there doesn't think much of your karate, Randy." And I was like, "Oh, I don't care about that. Don't worry, Sensei." He's like, "No, Sensei Suino's like, I'm gonna have a little fun with this." And so then, when the Sensei said, "What do you want to do tomorrow?" Suino Sensei said, "I want to do kumite." And the Sensei said, "Oh, you like kumite?" And he said, "No, not me. But Dofen Sensei likes kumite, and I'd like to see him fight that guy over there." And he said it all in Japanese. And then you could see this
Right. You see the look on the guy's face, the blood drain.
kind of
Right.
white, right? We didn't do kumite the next day. And
Man.
a good friend of mine from that dojo and one of Suino's teachers, Shimizu Sensei, pulled me aside after and apologized. He said, like, "Look, Dofen Sensei, I can beat that guy up, and I don't want to fight you. So don't worry about that." But I'm just further relaying that, yeah, it's not quite like it is here.
No. No.
Hanshi Legacy, let's go to you for the final word on this topic. What are your thoughts on where that is in Okinawa versus North America, or any other part of that conversation you want to talk about?
I think some of the strains of Shorin and Okinawan arts are trying to keep the tradition, and the classical type of karate. But I think where most of the multitudes are being brainwashed a little bit is as well as they're trying to take over universities and karate itself, are the Olympics and the World Championships, because they have their own touch and go tag type of karate. And who doesn't want to be an Olympic athlete? Right? So what they're doing now is the universities are allowing the guys that are going to the Olympics to come in and take over the karate that used to be handled by classical martial artists who know the ins and outs, not just the sport effect of karate or jiu-jitsu or anything else like that. So it's losing to the sport, like you already said. How long is someone an Olympian?
Right.
Maybe
And
at the
how many
very
how many
outside.
people can reach that level? How many
Yeah.
people can reach that level? Right.
Yeah. So I think that's what's happening to it. But given time, hopefully people will start to be able to see what's going on by just simply seeing it and seeing how. And I'll repeat this is from before, but you probably never heard this. Are you going to send your 13-year-old daughter downstairs when somebody breaks into your house to defend you? You're not going to do that, right? So people will smarten up eventually, I think, and will realize that there are two different things here. These are not people playing football with their friends in a field. They're more like professionals, like in a National Football League, right? They're playing the same game, but it's completely different.
Thanks so much, Hanshi. Thanks everyone for that incredible opening. This show's going to fly by. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said, my name is Sean Benson. If you are watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe, hit that like, drop a sweet comment, drop a question. It could stimulate maybe a future guest for us, or we'll circle back with one of the ones we've already had. If you're listening to the podcast, drive safely. Up here in Canada, you're going to start getting some freezing, so listen closely, but drive well. And if you're watching in real time on Zoom tonight, you get to be a part of our living history. And the button's going to flash on the bottom in the chat. It just did. And that's where you can drop a question for our guest or for one of us as far as a topic relating to what we're already talking about. We definitely want to spend our time more on our guests, but we're happy to ask those questions and make your question a part of this living history. It's funny, I had this little intro teed up when it felt like Sensei Suino wasn't going to be able to make it, which is so out of the ordinary. And I was thinking back on my 31 years of martial arts and my instructors on this call. I've never been on a call that Sensei Suino hasn't. And I can count probably on one hand in 31 years going to one of Hanshi Legacy or Sensei Dauphin's classes where they weren't there. And the absolute regularity with which these men show up, and the women who aren't on the call but run clubs as well, the absolute regularity is something that can't be overstated. If you're a student and you go to class tomorrow and your teacher's just standing in front, either thank them out loud or take a quiet moment of gratitude, because it's not easy every single Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, whenever they have class, to just show up. And I just want to say thanks to my teachers because they just keep showing up. So I want to throw it to you, Sensei Dauphin.
Thanks. I remember saying to Sensei Legacy once when I was like a green belt, he got a migraine and he had to leave the class, and he came over and said, "I'm really sorry that I got to go." And I said, "Sensei, most of the students don't apologize to you when they don't show up, so you shouldn't feel too bad about it." Right? That's a good perspective, Randy. Thanks for saying that. So, Hanshi Calandra, I always get to do the introduction of the guest, unless I'm not here, which has only happened one time. So Hanshi is a 10th Dan in Isshin-Ryu Karate. He spent 22 years with the New York Police Department and retired in 2010 as a detective in the Intelligence Division. Hanshi Calandra is certified in FBI defensive tactics, and he's taught numerous martial arts students, and as well has taken all kinds of law enforcement seminars throughout the United States. He is the founder of P.C.C.T, which is the Institute for Police Control and Cuffing Techniques. Hanshi was the chief instructor of the Seishinkan Martial Arts Dojo in New York for over 35 years. And after relocating to Wittmann, Arizona, which is where he's located now, he runs that same Seishinkan West. So same name, just tag the West onto it. Hanshi Calandra is an internationally recognized instructor, and he's taught seminars in China, India, Europe, South America, and all across the United States. I don't see Canada on that list, so we have to get him up here for
I have been up there, but not to teach a seminar.
Okay, well, careful what you say. It might happen. In addition to his 10th Dan in Isshin-Ryu Karate, he's a 7th Dan in Matayoshi Kabuto, which we've had lots of people on who do that great system as well. Indoor disciple of Chen style Tai Chi Chuan practical method, Shoden and Tenshin, Shoden, Katori, Shinto, Ryu. Studied many other martial arts, feeding crane kung fu, kendo, eskrima, naginata do, judo, aikido, Qui-Gon, like the list. He's been in martial arts for a long time, so it's not surprising that he's been in a lot of different arts.
Means I'm old.
Despite how the rest of us look, we're all a little older than you probably think. It's the camera and the makeup that we get done before makes
It's
us
the
look
suit.
a lot younger.
It's
Yeah.
the suit.
And I was saying before that I was trying, when I saw his name, I was like, how do I know this person? How, like, for sure we must have crossed paths somewhere. And then as I was doing more research, I came across this podcast, the Martial Truth podcast. And if you don't follow that one and you're a martial artist, you really should. It's really good content. I put it on in the dojo all the time. Like sometimes just to sit there and watch it. Other times if I'm cleaning or doing things, like just having it on and looking while I'm doing stuff. I just love having it on. It's one of my favorite.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite ones. I encourage everybody to. The opening says it all, Sean. Like, I mean, that's that type of an opening makes me happy. I know it makes Sensei Legacy happy. Sensei Suino's into it, really vibing. Real martial artist, real guy. He's friends with a former guest who's friends of ours, Sensei Glenn Cunningham. They're both cops over there in New York. And yeah, so I just want to get going. I want to say thank you, Hanshi Calandra, for coming on. I'm really looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. This has been fun so far.
Yeah, thanks so much. So let's jump right in. Let's make this about you, and very specifically, Hanshi, what was it like for you growing up, and what brought you into your first martial arts organization?
So I joined a karate dojo, Isshin-Ryu Karate Dojo, that was at my local YMCA. When I started, there weren't as many dojo around as like you have now. And also the schools were a little more expensive. My parents couldn't afford it, so the YMCA was cheap. So the guy I started there. I started because there was an incident that happened involving my parents where they were attacked by a group of teenagers in my neighborhood. And those teenagers, lived very close. I felt there'd probably be some problems for me. So I said to myself, I better learn how to fight. So I started with, the karate there, and, I stayed with that teacher for a little over 10 years. He turned out not to be what he claimed to be. And I started young, 15. As I got older, I saw some things the way he acted that kind of bothered me. And so eventually I severed ties with him. Then, next I started EI, and then from there, jiu-jitsu, and then just on and on. But that's what led me to initially train in martial arts. So my focus has almost always been for self-defense. And I did wind up having to defend myself against a couple of those guys that attacked my parents months down the road. So, so it turned out that it was a smart move, to begin to learn how to fight. And then I started in 79. I became a police officer in 88. So I had 10 years or so under my belt, which was a big advantage when I went into the police department, as far as, being able to know something, although I did realize that some of the way I was taught the techniques and how to do them didn't work in combat. I had to adjust and figure out the proper way to do the technique because I knew it couldn't be the technique. The technique's in every martial art. Kotegashi is in every martial art. Okay. But why didn't it work the first time I did it? Well, because I wasn't shown it correctly. And then I figured it out. And then as I did it more and more on different criminals and it worked better, I realized, okay, so that was one of the things that I also found interesting, being thrust into the world of real violence as opposed to dojo violence.
So let's back up just a little before that police time, because I do want to get to that for sure. But months after starting karate,
yeah,
you end up getting into a conflict with the very people who prompted you to take karate.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a little bit there. Like, how did that go?
So here's what happened. So these guys attacked my parents. What they did was they hit my mother in the neck with like an ice ball. And my mother had, whatchamacallit, she had a spine disease. So my father turns to them and confronts them, and needless to say, fisticuffs ensue. My mother goes and gets 2 black cups of coffee from the store right there, throws them on 2 of the kids. They wind up pressing charges against the kids. The kids get arrested. They go to court. The judge warns them that if they go anywhere near my parents or go anywhere near me, that there'll be repercussions. So what they do is they get another kid. And that's the guy that I wind up having to deal with. And, I had fought him on an afternoon and he lost. And then what happened was I was at the dojo training. And this is a totally true story, right? So, I mean, I don't care if people believe it, but it's 100% true. I'm at the dojo and 2 of my friends show up and they go, listen, there's a whole bunch of guys waiting for you on your way home tonight. Cause I used to walk, right? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, yeah. And one of the black belts overheard it. And he looked old when I joined, this guy. and he'd worked on the docks in New York. He was a tough customer. So him and a brown belt come over to me and they say, we're going to go with you. And I was so afraid that the black belt, the older guy, like he might kill somebody. Like I was literally afraid he might kill one of these kids. I said, no, it'll be all right. I'll be all right. And yeah, I walked home and sure enough, I got to this street corner right near my house and there was 20 people there. And the same guy that I fought on Friday was there again. And he picked his hands up and he wanted to go again. And they're all yelling, we're next, we're next. And I'm like, okay. And then I really did a number on him. And my mother, I got home, my shirt was torn off. I had scratches on my back because part of it had gone to the ground. And my mother called the cops. And the cops showed up and they're like, you afraid of these guys? I said, no. They said, you know where they live? I said, yeah. He's all right, get in the car. So go around the block. They literally live right around the block. And he went and we rang bells and he'd have the kid come out. And the cop, I'm telling you, it's 100% true story. The cop looks at the kid and said, you got a problem with this guy? And he goes, yeah. He goes, all right, let's go. Come downstairs. You're going to fight him right now. I'm going to referee. And the kid's face just drops. And he's like, I don't want to do that. And the cop says, all right, don't make me come back here because I'm going to drag you down here. And I'm going to let him beat you up right in front of me. And then we walked up the block and there was a second guy. And the cop grabbed him and he says, okay, well, here he is. You're going to fight him right now. And, now that they're being put on the spot, now they're not so tough, right? So, he did me a real solid, that police officer. I mean, he's an older guy, when I say older again, I'm 16, maybe, I don't know. Right. He's maybe in his 40s. Right. But he looks back then, he looks older. And, he said to me, he said, listen, kid, you just do what you got to do with these guys. But if there's a problem, just reach out for me at the precinct. I'll come back and we'll go around there and I'll referee. And they backed off after that. I mean, cause he made them look like the cowards they were. So
that's freaking awesome. So we don't want to live here too long, but quick question. What did you learn in months? Right? Like,
well,
because if you think about it, you didn't have all the techniques, but you got something early.
Yeah. So, I realized like when the guy threw punches at me, I stepped backwards, right? And then I blocked the punch. And then as soon as I blocked that punch, he immediately threw the next one. His next hand came flying. And now I stepped back and blocked the hand. And in that karate school, the guy who ran the dojo, he'd been in a lot of like bar fights, but he always taught you to step back when you blocked a punch. So I wound up, now I'm backpedaling as I'm blocking. He's not hitting me. I'm blocking everything. Lucky for me, he fell. And then I hit him with a front kick. Right. But, even then I started to realize, well, this didn't work. Like in the karate school, I stepped back, I blocked the punch and I counter right away with the punch, but it didn't work here because the other punch came so fast. Right. So, I learned, like I'll tell you, the second fight I had with him, I tripped over a curb and I fell on my back and he was on top of me and he's trying to get a hold of both my hands and he couldn't get a hold of my hands. And I hit him. I'm not lying. I hit him with a spear hand in the throat and I seized his throat and I rolled him off me and I jumped back up. So, I didn't know that much, but, I think the big thing with real fighting is being willing to fight. I mean, if you're willing to fight, and you're not afraid to get in there and mix it up, that's a big part of, a lot of people think they want to fight until they're there. And then especially if they're not doing well, then all of a sudden they realize this was a big mistake and they don't want to continue, so.
I really appreciate that simple perspective, because the idea of blending what you learned in the dojo with what you figured out on the spot. So let's move that ball forward a little bit, because this goes back to what I wanted to ask you at the beginning, and I think it's a good time for it. When I'm looking at your webpage and Sensei Dolfang gives the intro, you're talking very much about practical arts. You're talking very much about the Chen style practical arts. No sport fighting. This is for self-defense. So talk about that journey and what you did to go, yeah, this doesn't work, but the technique works, just not the way I'm doing it in the dojo. I thought that was a really important distinction.
Yeah. So like, Nick, you do judo, right? And I do jujitsu. And one of the things I started training is, not using the gi all the time to throw, right? Because again, the guy out there is not necessarily going to have a uniform on. But, one of the things, I started getting more practical. I realized that I looked at the kata. And in all the kata, if you add up the amount of times you step forward and the amount of times you step back, it's overwhelmingly stepping forward. In the Koru, the jiu-jitsu I do, you're always advancing on the enemy. You're not retreating from the enemy. In the Chen style, one of the principles is there's no retreat in Chen style. There's no retreat. And that also means about winding your hand up. There's no retreat. It's you move in, you eliminate the threat. Lu Chang'e, a feeding crane, says, if it's not about eliminating the threat in 3 seconds, I'm not interested. So I went through all the same things I think probably everybody here did. I did a lot of, Jiu Kumite, sport fighting in the dojo I came up in. There's a video of me doing some of it on YouTube floating around, right? But probably about 30 years ago, and again, as I became a police officer and I was in more combat, observed more combat, I realized a karate sparring match looks nothing like actual combat. So I stopped doing sports sparring altogether in my dojo. So we do a lot of close in where the guy attacks and you have to respond. And that's the way it is pretty much is in combat. He attacks, you respond, whatever that attack may be. I don't spend a lot of time on ground fighting. I didn't find myself in the ground a lot as a police officer, unless I'd put the guy there and then I would drop down to handcuff him. But very rarely, as a matter of fact, I can only think of one instance where I went down to the ground with somebody and it was because I lost my balance in combat, right? So this idea that most fights go to the ground, I don't agree with it, unless you're talking about that the loser goes to the ground, because he should go to the ground when the fight's over. He shouldn't be able to do anything, right? So if that's your definition, I have no problem with it. So I just began to change my practices. Then I also instituted some training drills, and I'm not saying I'm the person that created these. Believe me, I never think that about anything I do. But I started training people to fight multiple opponents in the dojo. I created these drills, and then one of my students gets attacked by 3 bikers in Dick's Sporting Goods. He's not in law enforcement. He's a computer guy. And he takes the 3 guys out in a blink. And he literally comes to me the next day and says, it was just like the drill. I couldn't believe it. He says afterwards he got nervous because he thought he might get in trouble, right? But there were witnesses that said these guys had stolen something and they attacked him first, right? So it turned out okay. So, you know, the one thing I tell people is, you know, as long as you survive the combat, then you have time to figure out what went wrong. So in the beginning, when I was doing techniques on people, and obviously as a police officer, you know, we're not there to kill the criminal. We're there to take him into custody and take him under control. But like I've told people, you know, take the 2 biggest guys in your dojo and tell them to try to put your hands behind your back, but they're not allowed to kick or punch you, and you just resist it. And they will find that they will have a very hard time putting your hands behind your back, because, you know, that's the thing. So initially when I started doing the joint locking techniques, you know, I'd start with one, the guy would move, I'd have to follow up with the second one. As I became more proficient, I could pretty much get the guy on the first technique. So, you know, combat's like anything else. You get better at it as you do it. And in the beginning, there's so many factors that come into play in combat that we cannot recreate in the dojo. We can't. You can't recreate the chemical dump. You can't recreate the heart. You can't recreate the blood vessels constricting, because it's never a chance of death or serious physical injury in the dojo. It's just not. I mean, it's the same thing even in UFC. A UFC fight is nothing like you know, real combat and what goes on in real combat. I mean, I'll just give you a quick example. I had to hold a guy down. The guy was either on drugs or whatever, a really strong guy. I'm holding him down in an arm bar, right? And I took him to the ground. So I'm on the floor, hold him in the arm bar. And the other cops are trying to get his hand behind his back to cuff him. And I'm holding this like for probably, I want to say 2 minutes, which is a lifetime in combat. And they finally get his hand cuffed, and now they bring the other hand around, and literally my arm was frozen. I couldn't lift my arm up. So now I'm thinking, am I hurt? I'm like, literally, am I injured? I didn't even know what was going on at the time, right? So that day, for whatever reason, my wife was picking me up. My wife's a doctor. So I got changed, and I get in the car, and I said, listen, I can't move my arm. She goes, what happened? So I told her. She says, how long were you holding the guy in that position? I said, a couple of minutes. She says, the lactic acid built up. It's got to drain out. So that's why your arm's frozen. So now think about that for a second. That's not something that we have happen in the dojo. So as soon as that happened, like that immediately became a point to bring out in my classes. Hey, listen, you know, you're attacked in the parking lot and you get the guy down, you're holding him down in an arm bar, you're waiting for the police to get there. Okay, well, you may have to hold him for a while. And, you know, maybe your arm's going to go dead. Like, okay, now, so, you know, I'm just saying, like, I'd never experienced that in a dojo or any training seminar. And then I'd never heard that brought up in any of the law enforcement classes I attended. So until it happened to me, it was, you know, it was a bit of a shock. But it was, again, a good learning experience, you know. Taught me certain things about the human body that you have to be aware of. Because again, when we think we're cranking a joint lock in the dojo, no, we're not. No, we're not. I can tell you now. I mean, I've mentioned it on the podcast. I mean, I've put people in joint locks where they immediately shit their pants. I mean, it just exploded out of them. The pain is, when you're doing it for real on somebody and you do them right, the pain is frightening. And for criminals, it works great. They expect you to punch them. They expect you to kick them. They expect you to hit them with a nightstick. When you grab one of their fingers and you put them down with where you're holding just one finger and that pain is radiating through their body, that's something they've never experienced. And it's something that sends a clear message. That's why I think, you know, I have a big problem with a lot of the law enforcement training. You know, I just don't think it's sufficient. You know, and my son's a police officer too, but he trained for a long, long time. So he's had no problem handling himself out there. But, you know, I just think there's a lot of problems. And again, I started doing a new series on breaking down how to do each joint lock. And I'm shocked at the response to that.
Mm.
It's positive response. So I think there's people that really want to learn it. It's another thing you're not seeing done that much anymore in Okinawa. The joint locks are just not done as much, so as they once were.
So I want to come back to the issues in law enforcement, but Hanshi Legacy, I want to go to you with this question. We're not going to go around the horn on this one, but I want to talk to you about moving forward, not moving back, and how to replicate the adrenaline of a street scenario when training.
Well, definitely the Okinawans. One of the things they say is, if you want to be a good fighter, you need to learn to be a good blocker. Because the Okinawans, I think it's called Chushin, I'm not sure. The Okinawans, when they step to the inside, they stay there fighting. They use their blocks. They don't go in and out. The Japanese shift in, do what they're going to do, and shift back out. The problem there is it easier for you to just block and strike, or is it easier for you to have to move in and block and strike? So I believe the Okinawans have a better way of fighting, and they don't do the shifting so much. They place themselves, like what Richard Kim used to say, in the eye of the tornado, and they handle everything that's going crazy around them. So, what was the other part of your question?
Well, we fight so much in our club, but how can you replicate the adrenaline of when four guys come at you in a parking lot?
Well, you fight a lot. The lactic acid is a stage between 30 seconds and 3 minutes. But when you go out and play for the first time with your kids and you're like 35, you get a sore ass, you get a sore leg. That's lactic acid, just because you can breach that. You can break through that by training regularly. So I agree with trying to hold a lock, and then after 30 seconds, the glycogen's gone out of your muscle and your liver, and then it starts. Then you start like really, really working, and I could see you losing your strength doing that. I agree with that.
Appreciate that, Hanshi. Before we get back to the police department stuff, Hanshi Calandra, we have a question that came in from Al Panakia, and he would like to know, have you had any connection experience with any of the Isshin-Ryu guys in Detroit?
Well, there's someone on here, Susan Ingerman. I think she's from Detroit, and she recently came under me in Isshin-Ryu. So no, I haven't. I'm aware of some of the Isshin-Ryu guys in Detroit. I have friends in all the different Isshin-Ryu groups, even though I'm directly connected with Okinawa and Master Shimabuku. So no, I'm not familiar with any one individual. Like I said, I met Susan Ingerman this past August at the IWK World Championships, which are held every 2 years. So I'm helping her. She just recently became a member of the Isshin-Ryu World Karate Association, her dojo. So I don't really have, I'm not sure. I mean, I may know some other people. I mean, I got to tell you, through the channel and everything, so many people reach out to me. I mean, I literally get phone calls from Australia. I mean, people are reaching out from everywhere, So no, I don't know anybody in particular from Detroit.
Right on. So let's look at you're in martial arts 9 years now. You're still with your first instructor, and you're getting into law enforcement. So talk to us about that transition, what you found the issues to be, and I don't know if it sounds like you don't necessarily want to get too specific about your instructor, but what was it that after 10 years, like how does a student after 10 years decide to leave a teacher?
Well, he wasn't training. He was a guy that was just standing around in a gi. Okay. So what you had was two factions kind of happen in the dojo: the worker outers and the stand arounders. Okay. And then I was teaching a lot of the classes, and I was being treated quite poorly. Right.
What was that?
We had opened the dojo together along with 3 other guys. After a year, I just had to get out. And he went on a campaign of trying to destroy me for about 5 years after that. So he was really not a good guy. He passed away last year. And he lied. He said he was a direct student of the founder of Isshin-Ryu Tatsuo Shimabuku. He never trained with Tatsuo Shimabuku. So again, that kind of stuff you could get away with pre-internet. But once the internet comes out and once people start getting on planes and actually going to Japan and Okinawa and asking people, oh, by the way, did so-and-so train with your father? No. Okay, right. So it just turned out, and then all of his students left him. He wasn't a good person. Here I am, a full partner in the dojo. I catch him in the dojo with a woman that's not his wife. I'm good friends with the wife, right? And I'm like, okay, this is my business too. This is my reputation too. And you're bringing this garbage into my dojo. And that's when I finally left. And the funny thing is he even tried to get me fired at work. He made me the subject of an internal affairs investigation, which wound up backfiring on him, and one of his guys wound up being forced to retire. So it was a nasty situation for a long time. I actually had the internal affairs investigator say to me, what's these guys' problem? Are they watching too many Saturday afternoon Kung Fu movies? I said, maybe, I don't know. But everything he tried backfired, and I just went on and, trained. I mean, my whole thing was I train. If I train and work on my craft, that's all I got to worry about. Everything else will just fall into place. I've never asked for rank, right? Again, if you train and, okay, you'll probably get rank. If you don't train, well, if you may get rank anyway, because let's face it, rank's the easiest thing to get in the martial arts world. You could always find someone that's willing to promote you. I was recently promoted to 10th Dan, which was, surprising, right? And, most people were very, happy, congratulatory. And there were people that felt I was too young. But, the founder of my style was probably in his 40s when he was a 10th Dan, and my teacher was in his 30s or 40s when he was recognized as a 10th Dan. And they're realizing now in Okinawa that only recognizing people when they're older at these high Dan ranks is a problem. They're looking to go back to where maybe they promote them when they're a little bit younger, so they have more years where they're actually physically able to do things and help people and, move the art forward, as opposed to, awarding the guy 10th Dan when he's 80 or 85, So, so that's why I left him. And then one of the things was I started doing Jodo and EI, and I attended a seminar with a Japanese instructor. I believe his name was Nakanishi. And, he did EI. He was thin in shape. He was like 68 at the time. And then I watched him in Kendo. I wasn't doing Kendo at the time, but I watched him in Kendo fight like 30 people, one right after the other. And I was like, most of the teachers in my dojo couldn't do this. They'd pass out because they don't really train hard and they don't work out, So I was basically being punished for actually training. And, I was being told things like, get in line and you'll get promoted. And I'm like, okay, well, then I won't get promoted. So, and then I left and I started my own thing. And when I started my own dojo, some of the people left that dojo and came with me. So obviously that didn't make them too happy either. But my philosophy has always been, well, if you were doing the right thing, why would those people leave and come with me? So yeah, it was a bad experience, but like I teach my children, all experience is good because it taught me how not to act. Don't be like him. And when I first went to Okinawa, Master Shimabuku, without mentioning him by name, gave me a lot of advice. And some of the things he said was, don't eat too much and get fat. If you do, your students will leave you. Don't drink too much. Don't just talk about karate. You have to practice karate. You have to do karate. You have to lead by example. And I knew what he was doing. He was reinforcing, remember why you left your first instructor, right? And, don't let that happen to you. And I've lived by that, my whole martial arts life. So, I think it's important too, because you stay in shape, you're healthier, right? And we all see so many our contemporaries that, the standard joke in my dojo was, Sensei, you'll never make 8th Dan because you're not fat enough. That was always the standard joke, right? In my dojo, right? So, so yeah. So what else? What else you want to hit me with?
Well, I just love how simple those tenets are. And, I do think they can be forgotten. And I see it, I'm not even talking about martial arts, but my parents were in academia. And you see somebody achieve a rank and they stop researching and they stop publishing and they get fat and they are no longer, and obviously we see it in the martial arts. What I'd like to hit you with is talk about how you transitioned into police work, but then as you're doing that, how that's feathering back into your martial arts,
Oh.
but also how it's making you realize what the issues in law enforcement training are.
So first off, I'll just say this. I think if police officers were better trained to handle physical confrontation, you'd have less shootings and you'd have less complaints against police officers, right? I probably handcuffed 1,000 people in my career, and I have about 13 civilian complaints, and actually all of my civilian complaints were made by criminals I arrested, right? So here's what started to happen. Something would happen at work. I'd do a technique, and then the next night I'd have class, and it would say, okay, we're going to work on this tonight. Last night this happened. When I went to do this, the guy moved like this, and I had to do that. So we'd bring that in. But then I started to have a lot more police officers training. So now the next night at class, one of my guys walks in and says, hey, last night this happened. Let me show you what I did, but it didn't work great. Is there something else we could have done? Okay. 2 days later, another guy comes in and says, hey, a guy came at me like this last night. All right. Okay. So for probably a minimum of 10 years in my dojo, it was a combat factory.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you had multiple guys that were engaging in real combat, and coming in and saying this happened, that happened, or they'd walk in and say, I took a report last night. The guy held the knife like this on the guy. And I'd go, like that? And he'd go, yeah, the guy held a knife like that. And I'm like, all right. So let's see what we do if that against that, So it was eye-opening. I mean, being in a lot of actual hand-to-hand combat, it dramatically changes your martial arts. And like I said, I mean, I don't care how well you think you can recreate it in the dojo, you can't. It's impossible. You can't recreate it, unless both people are willing to get seriously injured. If two people decide, okay, let's really go at it and let's see what happens. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of the book that Mario McKenna translated on, I think his name, Wittmann, the old Okinawan karate guy. It's from like the 1930s. It's one of the early books. In it, he says, you can't really do karate safely when you're working with a partner unless you're both agree to get hurt. If you're both willing to get hurt, then you can do it. If not, you have to put some parameters on it because people just get seriously hurt. I mean, look, in 1995, a guy was killed with one kick at the pre-tournament in Okinawa. One kick, guy was killed. Guy had 5 kids. Dead, one kick. I don't know. Are you aware of that? Yeah.
No.
1995. I was there in 97 for the grand opening of Budokan. And they were serious about contact. They were like, there'll be no contact. Of course, was there contact? Yeah. That's why the Okinawans, a lot of them are not doing sparring anymore in tournaments because they're afraid. Guy was killed with one kick. Non-contact tournament. No contact, point fighting. One kick. Dead. Not good. 5 kids. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sensei Suino, I know you had some stuff you wanted to get into here.
Well, I just want to kind of explore the spectrum a little bit. Hanshi Calandra, a karate dojo I was at for a number of years, probably, I don't know, a dozen of the more senior guys worked as bouncers in a particular club in our town. And so we had kind of a similar laboratory, right? Where they'd come in and say, oh, so-and-so did this. This is what I did. But the experience for the most part was pretty positive for these guys because they trained all the time. And most of the guys they had to bounce or fight with were drunk or overconfident.
Right.
I wonder if you have any perspective on that, like the difference between what you described. I think it was a good laboratory for us, but I suspect it was different than what you experienced.
So here's the difference. What I tell people. So when you're in law enforcement, and again, specifically in law enforcement when you're carrying a firearm. When you're carrying a firearm, if the criminal gets the better of you, there's a good chance he's going to take your gun and he's going to shoot you. We had a sergeant who got knocked flat on his back by a guy who was half his size. The guy yanked his gun out of his holster, stood over him, pointed the gun at his head. The sergeant begged for his life. For whatever reason, he didn't shoot the sergeant, but then he went up the stairs and another cop car pulled in and he immediately opened fire on those cops. Luckily, none of them were hit. They managed to arrest him, get the sergeant's gun back. So that's the thing that I think makes it a little different. And again, I've had students that were bouncers, and again, I'm not knocking their experience because I think whatever experience they can bring is good experience, and, a lot of the good bouncers are good at what? De-escalating, right? Right. They're good at, maybe, right. So, but I think that's the biggest difference. I mean, when you're dealing with a hardcore criminal, I'll just give you an idea. Every criminal thinks when I stop him, he thinks I know he's wanted. Like they think that, oh my God, the cop's stopping me because he knows I'm wanted. And if I let him cuff me, I'm going back to jail for a long time. But obviously we don't know that, but that's how they think. So you go up to a guy and what starts as, a minor thing, littering, let's say, all of a sudden turns into you're in a fight for your life.
Mm.
And you're like, okay, and then the sergeant gets there and says, what happened? I said, well, I stopped him for littering. And he goes, littering, right? And then you run the guy and it turns out, he's wanted. He's wanted for something heavy, right? One of my first felony arrests, I approached the guy for littering. And he told me he didn't have ID. I said, well, I'm taking you off the train. If you don't have ID, I'm going to arrest you. I didn't know he had a brick of crack cocaine in his pocket. Soon as I took him off the train, he attacked. And he lost and he went to jail. But again, I said, well, they go, oh, that's some arrest. That's some arrest. That's felony drugs. It started as a littering situation. And here's the other thing. Like, if when I said to him, hey, why'd you throw that big bag of garbage between the moving train cars? Because I was a transit police officer. If he had just said, I'm sorry, officer, I shouldn't have done it. I won't do it again. What would I probably have said? All right, man, I'm going to cut you some slack this time, but that's not what he did. Right. And so, I think he wound up going in for 2 to 7. 2 to 7. Well, you're talking a brick of crack cocaine. You're talking heavyweight. And here's the other thing. He's delivering that for someone. So jail is the least of his worries. Because the drug dealers he was supposed to deliver that for, they're going to be waiting for him when he gets out. Like he's got a problem. He owes them that money. So, yeah.
I just want to tell you, I wrote down every criminal thinks he's wanted. And at some point in my life, I'm going to quote that because it has to do so beautifully with this idea that we all think everybody knows what our deal is and nobody knows or gives a shit. Just be cool,
Right.
Fonzie.
Right. The other thing is, and I'll just mention this is, you can break a guy's arm. I've broken people's arms in combat. They keep fighting.
Right.
Where you see in the UFC, a guy gets put in a good joint lock, he taps out. Except for the women. A lot of the women take broken arms because they can handle pain better than men, right? But I just tell people that too, like I've heard, like I had a judo instructor, and when I say the name, you're going to know it, Rusty Kanakogi. So I did judo in college with her. Her senior guys were asking me to teach them how to block punches, and she would make statements like, oh, when you throw a guy and drop him, he's finished. Yeah, no, he's not. Like the human body's tough. And even in concrete, you can throw a guy and you'd be surprised. I mean, and again, criminals have a very different mentality. They're used to pain. If they've been in prison, they've been in serious fighting situations in prison, a lot of times involving blades and other things. I used to actually ask the more serious criminals I would arrest when they were in the cell and I was doing paperwork, I'd actually ask them questions. I'd say, how does a guy come at you in prison? I said, how does he normally approach you? I said, how does he hold the knife? Where does he put the knife? How does he come at you? And some of them would tell me to go screw off, and other guys would show me. And I would sometimes even go in a cell. I say, show me how he's doing that, right? And they were cool because, again, it's over. I arrested him. Even if the guy tried to hurt me, I never held that against him. He's the bad guy. His job is to try to hurt me. Once it's over, as long as once we get to the command, he starts acting like a civilized human being, no problem. I'll even buy him lunch. That's not an issue. But so I also got a lot of good information from that. So that's why I think it's important to understand that, I interviewed Hunter Chip Armstrong. He's the founder of one of the founders of the Hopology Society. He was a student of Don Drager's. And he mentioned that only 3 groups create fighting techniques. And that's the military, law enforcement, and criminals. No other group is responsible for creating real fighting techniques, right? That are being used for real, right? And when he added the word criminals, I had not even ever thought of it from that perspective, but he's right. Criminals have their own techniques. They do all kinds of things. They're very sneaky. And the big advantage they have is they're used to violence. Most people that study martial arts are not used to violence. They think they are, but they're not. They're very used to violence. So it's usually a shock initially when that criminal initially comes at you and really tries to harm you,
Thanks for that. That's an awesome perspective and an interesting perspective. Sensei Ofan, I know you wanted to take us to Okinawa for a second.
Yeah, your Shimabuku sensei is really famous. So just wonder
well, it's
how
Shimabuku Kichiro, so it's Tatsuo's son. It's
Great,
the son
but
of the founder.
still a very famous instructor. And I'm just wondering, so we talked about your early karate days, and then you're a police officer, and poof, you're in 10th then in Isshin-Ryu. So like you had to have at some point met that group and then found your way to that teacher.
So I met Kichiro Shimabuku the first time when I was a brown belt in 1981. Between 1981 and 1985, I started teaching karate at a sports and arts center in Manhattan, New York City. He came in 85 for one of the world championships. My instructor, I was still with that first guy, says, we're going to do the seminar at your place because your place is really nice. This sports and arts center was state of the art. It was beautiful. I said, fine. So Shimabuku Sensei comes in. He didn't remember me as a brown belt because basically, why would he? Right. Now I'm introduced as a sensei of that dojo. So initially he says, oh, this is your dojo. I said, yeah. He speaks English. He says, oh, have you sent any memberships, or do you have any black belts? I said, oh, I give them to Mr. Fink, and then he sends them to you. He goes, oh, okay. So later on that day, we had the workout, and Fink and the senior guys stepped off because Master Shimabuku's karate, he even says it. He says, Michael's karate is like my father, self-defense only. His karate is for health, and he does like the competition aspect. But later that day, there was a party in my first instructor's house, and they were all getting drunk. I don't drink. I've never have. Okay. So I'm in the backyard, and Master Shimabuku comes up and he sits next to me. He wasn't drinking either. And he starts talking to me, and we're just shooting the breeze about, not just karate, just life in general. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm talking to the headmaster, and we wound up talking for like 2 hours. So when I left my instructor, I got on a plane and I just flew to Okinawa. He didn't even know I was coming. And I just showed up in front of the dojo. And when he pulled up in the car, he did a double take. And when he got out, he goes, Michael, long time no see. New York, 1985. I said, yeah, Sensei. He goes, no letter, no phone call? I said, I sent a letter. I didn't get a response. I tried calling. And he looked, he goes, oh, old address, old phone number. Oh, I'll give you my new ones. He says, why are you here? I said, oh, I came to train. Okay. And we started training. What I wanted to do is I wanted to set up a formal relationship with him. And I didn't want to have to deal with any Americans or anybody in between. I wanted it me and the headmaster. And that's what I've tried to do from that point on. I try not to have a go-between because I just find it becomes aggravation for me. And so I started training, and I was there, I don't know, 10 days or so. And he said to me, you've been a Nidan a long time. And I said, well, I didn't think of that. I didn't think I've been a Nidan a long time. So the last night he says, you're testing for Sandan. I tried to turn it down, and he got kind of angry and said, so I shut my mouth and I tested for Sandan. And then, he said to me, I'll send you the certificate in the mail. I said, okay, you know, and I go back, and when he sent me the certificate, he backdated it 3 years, which, you know, obviously surprised me. And then what happened was we had another world championships, and my first instructor cornered Master Shimabuku and really started giving him a hard time about promoting me. And I was concerned that Master Shimabuku would think, oh, I took this guy Calandra, now he's causing me problems.
Mm.
But I knew people that were at this thing, and they said Master Shimabuku stood up and looked at him and said, I promote who I want. I'm the headmaster of Isshin-Ryu. You don't tell me who to promote. And then a few months later, I got promoted to Yondan. So I think he was sending a clear message. And then, 94, I went, and me and one of my students, a young guy, I said to him, I said, listen, Sensei, you got to get a website. You don't have a website. He says, no website. I said, no, Sensei, you got to get a website. This isn't a question. It's, you have to get one, right? He says, I don't have a computer. He goes, you do it. And I looked at my student, because I'm not a computer guy. I said, can we do that? Remember, this is 94. This is early days of the internet. And he goes, yeah, we could do it. So we set it up. So I've been running his website, his webpage since 1994. He gets a lot of memberships from it. He's very happy. And then I wanted him to make a video series, and he told me no. He said his exact quote was, there are enough old guys demonstrating Isshin-Ryu Karate on video. He said, you make the series. So then I made a series, Kata Bunkai. And my bunkai is nothing like his bunkai. And he loved it. He said, oh my God. I sent him the first one. He says, you keep doing it. Makes Isshin-Ryu look great. Very powerful. You keep doing. So then I did that. So, I've done a lot of things. I've brought a lot of people into the association. What I like about the association is it's lifetime membership. I don't have to chase people every year for dues. The next time you're sending Okinawa money is if you make Shodan and you want to get your Shodan certificate from Master Shimabuku. So I just, went up through the ranks, and, now I'm 10th Dan. And like I told people, I said, when I walked in as a 15-year-old, if you had said to me, well, one day you'll get promoted to 10th Dan by the founder's son, I would have told you you're out of your mind. Like, that's never going to happen. Right. And then it happened. And now I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around it. Right. Because it's, like Andreas Quast, I asked him, and he said to me, it's such a rare thing for a Westerner, for it to happen with a Westerner. And Andreas said, he says, I'm having a hard time how I want to react to this, because it's such a rare occasion. And I hadn't thought of it like that, because a lot of, like in Goju-Ryu, I know there were a few Goju-Ryu 10th Dans in the same dojo. So it happens on Okinawa where a 10th Dan will promote someone else in the dojo to 10th Dan. But we just haven't seen it where a lot of people in the West have been shown that same type of, And Master Shimabuku, to his credit, has promoted 4 of us to 10th Dan. 2 of them have passed away. The other one is in her mid-80s, and then me, and I just turned 61. So I'm the young buck of the group. The first guy was almost 90. The other guy was in his mid-70s, I think, when he got promoted. So what does it mean? I don't know what it means. It just means I've been around a long time, and whenever I think about promotion, I think of it, it's like an attaboy from your teacher. He's just saying, hey, I appreciate you training hard. You're working hard. I appreciate it. I don't think it means I should be able to tell other people in Isshin-Ryu what to do. Which again, we've all experienced senior guys in martial arts that as they go up in rank, all of a sudden they act like they're paying your mortgage when they're not. And they think they can tell you what to do, or you should do this and you should do that. And, I don't think that's good. I don't think it's good for the art. And I don't think it's good for young people to see senior people act like that, so.
Sensei Dauphin, were you going to jump in? Because we might be doing the same thing here.
Well, it's just getting the time. I'm just conscious of time as well, right? So I did have a follow-up question.
I'll go as long as you want, guys. So don't, if you got to go over a little bit, you ain't hurting my feelings. So whatever.
I'm just interested in, I'm a history lover. So if Shimabuku Sensei ever talked about his dad or relayed anything to you about him or his story, or
so it's interesting. One of the reasons I'm going to Okinawa now is I'm going to sit down with him, and I'm going to really, really hit him hard with questions. And I'm hoping he'll do it on camera. And if he doesn't, I have a voice recorder, so I'm going to record it. There's a lot of strange things with the Isshin-Ryu history, but let's back that up. There's a lot of strange things with all Okinawan karate history. I mean, some of the stuff is just very out there. Like I asked him in Europe in 2019 when I hosted the World Championships there, I asked him, I said, Sensei, I never asked you, where were you during World War II? And he said, oh, my father put us on a boat and took us to Kyushu to avoid the war. I said, oh, when'd you come back? He says, after the war. And he said, we got lucky because our ship wasn't sunk. A lot of Okinawans lost their lives. The Americans sunk their ships. So I haven't gotten into too much with him with his father, but I am going to when I go. I know, like he's always telling me, you're like my father, in terms of more self-defense, oriented. We know, there's been some things that have come up about Tatsuo. I just heard recently what's on his plaque at the Karate Kaikan. I don't know if any of you have visited the Kaikan yet. Yeah, I haven't either, so it'll be my first time going. But, on his plaque, and there's been some new research that came out showing that he probably started karate with Miyagi. And then Miyagi introduced him to Kion. So one of the things we've been discussing is he might have started with Miyagi in like 27. And our version of Seiyuchin is different from the traditional Goju-Ryu version. So now one of the thoughts is that the version we do is the version Miyagi was teaching at that time. And as he was developing his system, he just refined the kata more. Because Tatsuo didn't change the Sanshin, and we're pretty sure he learned Sanshin from Miyagi after the war. Because Tatsuo's wife has said that. He said, oh, he was training with Miyagi after the war. I think part of the problem on Okinawa and martial arts in general is martial arts have become Coke and Pepsi. Well, my style's better because of this. No, Pepsi tastes better than Coke, I know a lot of the Okinawans did not like Tatsuo because he got the Marine contract, the government contract to teach martial arts. I personally think there's still some resentment to that. Kichiro Shimabuku is extremely wealthy. So a lot of the Americans couldn't get over on him. He spoke English. Some people did get over on Tatsuo. I mean, the early Dan grades that were issued by Tatsuo was obviously a mistake, and he knew that, and he realized it. But the early days of issuing Dan grades, no one even knew what Dan grades were back then. They were kind of making it up as they went along. They're basing something on judo, but they're just making it up as they went along. So I mean, if you have specific questions that maybe I know the answer to, but maybe I won't. If I don't, I'll tell you I don't.
I don't have specific questions. It's just some of the best history you learn is just through conversation with people, right? And
Yeah.
so sometimes, so I don't have a specific question about is this a truth or is this a
Right.
lie? I just was, oh, my dad did this, or one leg was shorter than the other. Nobody ever
Right.
knew that, right? Like stuff like
Right.
that. Yeah.
Nick, you do Koru?
Not really.
Okay. So have you traveled in any Koru circles?
I know a few of the guys.
Okay, so in Japan, my first instructor told me that the headmaster of Sosu Ishido had added the Isshin-Ryu Karate Bobo Kumite into the style. And when I went to train with the headmaster in Fukuoka and I mentioned that to him, you would have thought I shit on his living room floor. His literal response to me was, why would I put something from a peasant art into a warrior art? So, so that's another thing. Okinawan karate in Japan, especially within a lot of the Koru, they look at the Okinawans as peasants. They don't take them as, and frankly, a lot of the Koru people, they couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. I mean, they just couldn't. They don't. The way they train and stuff, they don't train where the techniques are viable anymore. It's more fight choreography than it is actual pressure testing. But when I go to Okinawa, I'm planning on sitting him down. I'm going to hit him with a lot of questions. I mean, he can't train. He's recovering from some type of leg surgery. And look, at this point in my life, yeah, I mean, I don't have to go there and train with him. I want to spend time with him. He's 83 years old. And I want to sit down. I want to ask him a lot of questions. And he's also going to give me access to all the photos he has. So I'm going to be able to take photos of all the photos he has. And, so I jokingly said to Joe Swift, hey, Joe, maybe I'll bring back a photo of Tatsuo standing next to Kion Sensei. And Joe was like, oh my God, that would be like the Holy Grail. And I says, yeah, it's probably not going to happen, but we can dream, right? But we don't know what's there, right? So I'm going to go and sit with him and ask him a lot of questions. I have an exceptionally warm relationship with him. And he's an interesting guy. He's very reserved. He's a very proper guy. But when it comes to me, even some of the first generation students that have been around him and me together, they've said to me, they said, no, you have a very different relationship with him. So I'm looking forward to going. I'm looking forward to hopefully getting copies of photos and interviewing him and asking him questions. I may be visiting some other dojo while I'm there. Obviously, I'm going to be hanging out with Pat McCarthy. I'm supposed to be on another podcast, the Okinawa podcast, when I go there. So hopefully I'll do that and have some fun on that. But I'm looking forward to going. It's the first time I'm going alone since 1991, my first trip. All the other times I went, I brought groups, and this time I'm going by myself again. So
Well, you're about to be part of a very important group, Hanshi. It's the group of guests who've answered our 10 questions.
ooh,
So we're about to hit you with our 10 questions now.
okay.
Answer as impulsively as you can. Feel free to fill out your answer. However, do know that there is a 10-minute time limit.
Okay.
So, what is the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
The most effective move that I used a lot against criminals, Osotogari. Initially get them to the ground, and it works. Doesn't matter their size. Big, small. Now, they're not always going flying in the air, but you get them down on the ground, and you move them right into a joint lock and handcuff them. So that was a technique I did a lot.
Who is the most influential martial artist in your life?
I'm going to have to say Kichiro Shimabuku, and not so much from just a martial arts standpoint, by a how to act standpoint. That early advice he gave me just set the stage for everything I did after that. And just, it led me, again, I met Gakiya Sensei on Okinawa, trained with him for 17 years. I was lucky. Gakiya and Kichiro met and hung out together a little bit, which was great. So I think I'd have to say him because of the advice he gave me. That just changed everything, because when I would meet a senior teacher, I'd know how to talk to him. I'd know how to act. And it was always about training. So I'd have to say him,
Who do you think is the most influential martial artist of all time and why?
I have to say Miyamoto Musashi. And I'll say him because his Go-Rin no Sho is used in business schools. It's a book. I read it every few years. I mean, it's not just about fighting. You could apply a lot of the lessons there to things, but it also is about fighting. So I'd say probably Miyamoto Musashi.
What excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
I have a philosophy. I try to be better today than I was yesterday and better tomorrow than I was today. And, so my problem is I'm like addicted to martial arts, meaning I like all martial arts. And some I've just dabbled in, like Eskrima, Naginata. I had a cup of coffee. You know what I'm saying? Other arts I've done more seriously, and I'm at a more senior level to teach those arts. But I'm just looking forward to teaching, traveling more. I'm hoping to maybe start doing some more seminars if people are interested. I'd love to start doing that. And that's what I'm looking forward to. I mean, I'm retired from police work. I'm a full-time martial artist and granddad, all right, which that's another important title. Grandpa is an important title. So yeah, I mean, I'm loving it. I mean, I'm happy, and I just look forward to training and working on things and getting better and helping other people to get better.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
I think I'd like to hear him say, you led a very good moral life and welcome. That's what I'd like to hear him say. I have a very strict code for myself. I don't expect other people to follow that code. I don't push my morals on other people. That's not my place. But for myself, I live by a pretty strict code.
Is there a non-martial artist you'd like to fight the most?
A non-martial artist I'd like to fight the most. No, I gotta say no. You know, I fought so many criminals, and I fought some criminals that were tough customers. So I've done so much fighting that, like I still train as though I'm going to go out tomorrow and get attacked in a Walmart parking lot. However, I also hope that that doesn't happen because I've done so much of it. I'm just, I've done that, so no, I really don't have someone.
I'm relieved you didn't say Mother Teresa.
No, no.
We had bats. We had bats. We had
Oh, did you?
Uh,
Oh, okay.
Is there a martial artist, living or dead, in all of recorded history you'd like to train with the most?
I'm a huge fan of Dan Inosantos, and I've never got to train with him. But every time a video of his pops up on my feed, I'm just so impressed with how the guy moves and how he is. Again, he's always got a smile on his face. He's, like I try to make my seminars fun. I want to joke and have a good time. Like whenever I'm my Okinawan teachers, laughing, doing a seminar, we're having fun, we're laughing, so I'd have to say Inosanto, which is going to probably throw people for a loop because he does, again, I had a cup of coffee and a screamer, a cup of coffee. That's what I had. So, but he's a guy. So,
Well, that brings me to my next question. You're 18 years old. None of the arts you've trained for real exist. What art would you spend your life training?
so none of the ones I do now.
No, you
Okay.
can't do them.
Yeah, I think I'd have to go with the Filipino martial arts. I think I'd have to pick a Filipino martial art and go with that. Just because I haven't done that much. So that'd be something, I know it's effective in combat. So, because these guys, I mean, in the Philippines, it's, so.
Our last two questions come as a pair, Hanshi. What is
Okay.
your greatest achievement? What is your greatest regret?
My greatest, does it have to be a martial arts achievement?
Whatever you
Okay.
like.
My greatest achievement's my kids. End of discussion. Okay. What is my greatest regret? Wow. It's crazy, right? You'd think I'd have something right at the top of my head, but I'm trying to think. Let's just say, so let me say that maybe I made some mistakes sometimes in my handling of things in the dojo. Maybe some things I wish I could have handled a little bit better. But not something I lose sleep over. So,
A mere ponderance, not quite a regret.
right.
Hanshi, at the end of our show, we go around the horn and we talk about our time with you, but we're not quite there yet. We got a minute or two. Is there any last thing you want to say? And the last word will go to you, by the way.
Okay.
But is there any thing you want to make sure we think about before we go into that final round?
So all I'm going to say is one of the things I've really gone in the direction of in the last 30, 35 years is doing the physical arts at a high level with really high level body mechanics. And obviously the Chen style Tai Chi has really helped with that. But that's one of the things I emphasize. I think guys get caught up in things. And I think sometimes we practice in a way that maybe hurts us in the long run and we wind up getting injuries. And so that's one of the things I'd like to see. I'd like to see martial artists have the discussion. Like one of my friends is a Shotokan guy. And I say, look, a lot of you guys get knee replacement, hip replacement. When are the seniors going to get together and say, hey, maybe we're not doing something right. Let's fix this. But no, tradition says we have to do it like that. I just like to see the martial arts, take a step back and, literally start re-examining them, trying to make them better and say, okay, well, maybe we're doing something wrong. Maybe we're not moving right here, and let's fix it so we don't get these injuries. We don't get knee replacement. I'm lucky. I have a bad knee that I was born with because my kneecap sits in a weird angle, but I have no body issues. So I have no hip problems. My right knee is perfect. I don't have any other issues with my body. And I really think going in the direction of principle training, principle driven martial arts, as opposed to personality. Well, my teacher said it has to be exactly like this. And it turns out that's not really good for you. So principle driven training is what I'd say I'd like to see more people get involved in.
I'm really glad I asked that question.
Okay.
It was a great little last pop
Thank you.
before we take ourselves out. So, Hanshi Legacy, what do you want to say about our time tonight with Hanshi Calandra?
Oh, it was a good time. I was it was really interesting, the insight looking from the outside of police officer using real self-defense. And I could see where, because most of us are not facing somebody who may be crazed on drugs, or and the guy's actually trying to kill you, what you're going to do. You're not going to do all those fancy things. You're going to do what works. But I would also be interested in, if should we ever cross paths sometime, that you would look into white crane grappling. I think you would be surprised at the pain, the mind and the pain that it gives you when you apply.
Oh yeah, I don't disagree with that. What I'm saying though is when you think you're doing it on someone, when you do it on someone for real, the pain is amplified dramatically because they're not tapping out. You know, that's the only thing I'm saying. So I'm not, I mean, I think all grappling works if you do it right.
No, I think that you would appreciate
Yeah, I'd love to see it. Yeah.
It's a stand-up grappling.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Anyway, I hope to meet you sometime down the
Yeah, I
road.
hope so too.
Okay, thanks for coming.
Thanks, Hanshi Sensei Suino.
Well, I know Randy likes to go through things in great detail, but I'll tell you just a few items that, first of all, great conversation. I feel like I just signed on. We need a lot more time, so we may have to delve into this again. Some things you said that I really enjoyed: real violence as opposed to dojo violence. It's the loser who goes to the ground. That made me smile. A couple of things you mentioned, the Go Rin No Show. Like you, I believe in reading that over and over again. I think I've read it 20 or 30 times in English, and actually, while I lived in Japan, I read it in the original Japanese as well. And that was a long time effort, but really interesting. More just as something to have done once. About 30 years ago, I went to a seminar taught by Danny Inosanto, and he is better in person than he is on video. That guy has so much personality. We might be able to arrange a connection if you ever want one. One of our former guests and a good friend of mine, Kent Nelson, trains with him on a pretty regular basis.
Okay.
If you ever want that to happen. One of my favorite sayings when I teach martial arts, because I teach several, is the notion of what I call thematic core movements. And when you said principle-driven martial arts training, that came together for me. Just like that. Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm so glad I noticed your comment on Facebook that led to this introduction, that led to this.
Someone else sent me an email suggesting that I might be a good fit on this podcast. And I said, all right, I'll look into it. And then I saw it and I was like, oh, yeah, I'll reach out to these guys. We'll see what they say. Right. And I'll be happy to come back on. I mean, we could devote a talk just to combat.
Right.
And a lot of different things can go down that path. I mean, you know, not just my experience, but I can give you experience I saw other people do. And, you know, it's fascinating, you know.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure we'll talk
appreciate
again.
You.
And
I'm glad we got to meet.
And hopefully train again at some point.
Yeah.
Train together at some point. Randy, what do you got?
You ripped off one of mine, you know,
of course
I remember it was not Sensei Bob Wolf, but the first Sensei Wolf we had on, who is the military guy. And he said, go ahead and try and put me in a closed guard. I'm going to punch you in the nuts so hard. And then he also said, people say all fights end on the ground. And he said, only if you're losing. That was his response. But so I like all the stuff you, I really appreciate your honesty. Like you clearly have great reverence for Okinawan martial arts, but you're clearly open-minded enough to say there are some problems there that should be addressed, right? And if we keep talking about those things, then what's the point? I do want to say, judo. We finally have a person who went to the YMCA and started in karate, not in judo. I'm telling you, of all the people we've had on here, I would say in the 90 percentile, even the karate guys, the kickboxing guys, everybody are like,
Started with judo.
yeah, I started in judo at the YMCA. Every single one of them. It's like,
There
but
was
I'm
a judo. There was a judo school near me. Hank Kraft.
well, I'm glad you started in karate.
Yeah.
It's one out of 140 episodes that I can thumb my nose at the judo guys for a second.
That's funny.
I think it was that story about you having the conflict with the people who bothered your parents. Like, that's awesome. That should be a movie or something. But and I know that would resonate with Sensei Legacy, because I'm sure if you could go back, Sensei, to Rimouski and have the skills you do now, and that person was picking on your brother, it'd be a different story if you could get that back. Right.
Yeah.
So I like that story. I love that cop that took you around. I never met that guy, but he's in my top 10 favorite people of the earth. You said, you know, the person that's willing to fight is the most dangerous. In my dojo, I tell people all the time when they say, "Oh, bad," I say, anybody who's willing to stand in front of you and fight you, that's the most serious one. You have to take that
Yeah.
one most serious.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
the huge guy that you're afraid of. It's the little old lady with a knife trying to stab you. That's the
Yeah.
one. I loved all the talk about always advancing. My sense of say legacy said, when they move, you move in. You don't move back, you move in. Like, that was ground into me right from day one. I love that you said that. I also, like you said, my dojo was a combat factory. That's awesome. You should hang that, the combat factory. Also, when you said the bad guy's job is to try and hurt me. Yeah, right. Like,
That's it. I just want to say I would address all the rookies that came in. And what I would say to them is, listen, the bad guy is going to try to hurt you. Don't get upset about it. It's just like the movies. Your
Right.
job is to stop him from doing that. You know, that's just the way it is. Don't take it personal.
right. I like that story about Shimabuku, your backdated Sandan and your Yandan. And I
Yeah.
really like hearing that he stood up and said, I'm the head of the system, and
Yeah.
but he tells me who to grade. That's
Yeah.
something that people should listen to.
Yeah.
So listen, all the judo people who are hurt butt right now, because I made fun of you in the beginning, he did say that his most effective move wasn't a Soto Geri. So just chill out, okay? We threw some judo respect in there. I like that you said your sense is the most influential, of course, right? I really like most influential of all time. Musashi, big fan. Read that book on the regular. Next 5 years, helping people and doing more martial arts. Simple and exactly what it should be, in my opinion. Non-martial arts fight? No, there isn't one, right? Again, glad you didn't say Mother Teresa. Living or Dead, Dan Innocento, legend. I too just trained with Johann Skelberg, and he does Calais and Eskrima, and he's from
Okay.
Sweden. And man, it was so good to do some martial arts with that man.
It's just fun.
Yeah,
That
Filipino
stuff is
martial
fun.
arts.
Yeah.
And at the high levels, man, they're
Oh,
frightening good.
yeah.
Yeah. Greatest achievement, your kids, can't agree more. We all could handle things better on some days in the dojo, but that's still a regret every day. Thank you so much for coming on. Hanshi.
Listen, guys, I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad I got to meet all of you. I really enjoyed this. Anytime you want me to come back, I'll make myself available. You know, so. And again, I'm gonna mention this again, and hopefully you guys will pick up some more subscribers, because you should have more subscribers.
Well, we really appreciate your time with us. And then the one thing I want to add before I thank our team is just, you used the term really early, serious study. And when you said, for those of us who do this as a serious study, I really appreciated that. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you to Robert Shlumsky, Justin Shea, Andrei Sedashev, Alden Adair, Jesse Vitow, Sydney Dauphin, Josh Kitchens, Christian Landel, Daniel J. Holland, Dridi Gugliani, Stavros Savrulius, and Emily Ruth Driscoll. They run this thing behind the scenes. We don't have a show without them. Thank you so much, senseis, hanshis, and everybody for watching. We're so grateful you came tonight. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thanks.
night.
Take care.
Take care now.